Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming here in such grand numbers, and I would come too if I were you, because we have here three fabulous writers who will talk about how to write about historical crime. It says on the German title, writing about politics. I would like to understand this politics in the sense that we are not talking about questions that are unique to the Philippines, but they're questions in any country where there's violence, and I wouldn't know of any country where there's none. But of course there are different degrees, different kinds of violence, and we will focus on two specific periods in Philippine history. One is the Marcos dictatorship. Ferdinand Marcos was elected 1965, declared martial law in 1972, that lasted officially till 81, de facto till 86. And the second period is the regime of Rodrigo Duterte, who governed the country from 2016 to 2022, and who is now in The Hague at the International Criminal Court. I would like to, sorry, thank you, Patricia. I will introduce the three speakers, and I start with Patricia. Patricia Evangelista is a journalist and former investigative reporter for the Philippine news company Rappler. She covers human rights, conflict, and disaster. Her debut book, Some People Need Killing, a memoir of murder in my country, translated into German by Nico Fröber. Translated into German by Zoe Beck and published by Culture Books, is an account of the Philippine drug war, and it was hailed as journalistic masterpiece by The New Yorker. The book, released in October 2023 by Random House, was a New York Times top 10 best books of the year, a New Yorker and Economist best book of the year, and was Time Magazine's #1 non-fiction book of the year. It has since won the NYPL Helen Bernstein Book Award, was longlisted for the Moore Prize for Human Rights and the Penn Galbraith Award, and will soon be translated into 7 languages. That means we're already in the future because we actually have it here in German. Thank you very much, Patricia, of doing us the honor of being here. I actually first saw Patricia, or an image of Patricia, in the film 1 Million Cuts. That was shown, and I thought, this woman is amazing, and she's by far the most interesting person in this film. And I really, my heart jumped when I heard that your book is going to be released. And to the left, we have Katrina Tuvera, who has authored this book, Collaborators in English, Die Kollaborateure in German, translated by Jan Karsten and published by Wagenbach. Katrina Tuvera is a historian. She has written, for example, an extensive history of the University of the Philippines, and she has worked for several international organizations. She has co-authored and edited a lot of anthologies, and this is her second novel. Welcome to our panel, Katrina.
Thank you for having me.
Beside me is Jose Dalisay, fondly known as Sir Butch. Jose Dalisay is was or is still a professor at the University of the Philippines. Generations of writers have come out. You have come out of Jose Dalisay's school. because he is also with Likaan, the Center of Creative Writing at the University of the Philippines. And he has himself been active under martial law, like he belongs to the generation that we call the 68er Generation. The 68 generation in the Philippines had a similar yet different story because they revolted against the Vietnam War, where the Philippines were actually sending troops to, and about North-South issues. There were active feminist groups, and then martial law was declared, and a number of activists were forced in the underground. Some decided to join the guerrilla, the New People's Army. You have written a book, Killing Time in a Warm Place. That's one of your books. I will not enumerate all of them. Killing Time in a Warm Place is also the title of the German book, translated by Nico Fröber and by Transit Verlage. And Patricia, you were a student of José Dalisay?
Indeed, I was.
What did you learn of him?
Well, as that was 20 years ago, his general thought was you trim the fat from your stories. And I don't know why I recall it this way. I may have invented it myself, or I may have stolen it from Dr. Dalisay. I always thought he told us to abort our babies because it's kill your darlings, yeah? In the Philippines, abortion is illegal. So you can tell the many layers of difficulty there.
Could you elaborate on this payo? What's that in English? The
Advice.
Advice, thank you. You?
Well, I was teaching a class in fiction, and I must say that Patricia, even at that time, was like Athena coming out of the head of Zeus. She was already, she was in full possession of her talents that would emerge even more strongly years later. But this is an interesting beginning because we will be talking about the differences in approach between journalists and novelists or writers of fiction. Patricia turned out to be both an excellent writer of fiction in my class, but more importantly, she is one of the most important investigative journalists of her generation, if not of many generations of Filipinos. So I'm glad to have contributed to that beginning.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Katrina Tuvera, you were at De La Salle University.
Yes, I was.
Active. Could you? Does that make a big difference if one is from De La Salle or from UP?
Oh, yes. My undergrad was at the University of the Philippines. And this is a university that's mostly known for a lot of students who are left of center, probably even more radical than that. La Salle is more a business school. So there is that difference. I would say that students of UP are much more socially aware. But in recent years, La Salle students have also been learning more about that, about stuff like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Just my name is Annette Hug. I studied also at UP Diliman from 92 to 94. I did a master in women and development studies, and it's true. But the Tagalog I speak, I learned to have to tone down it, because if, for example, I speak about the Maralita Tagalunsod, the urban poor, people say, "Ay, komunista ka," or because they would associate this with the university. But this is maybe to introduce the topic of the big conflicts in Marcos' years. What were the biggest challenges to write about the Marcos years as somebody who has undergone it, who has been in prison, who has who was an active part of that resistance?
Well, I was a teenager when all of this began in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I was 18 years old when I was arrested and put in prison. I spent most of my 18th year there. So I was just really beginning to be a writer. I wrote for the campus newspapers, but my years ahead, my work as a writer of fiction, of short stories and novels was still ahead of me. But I can, of course, remember that under martial law, there was very little. There was writing getting done, but much of it was kept private because you could not publish that writing at that time, or you would risk imprisonment. And what happened after martial law was lifted was that there was now an outpouring of all of these stories that came out of that very dark period, and my novel was among those, very loosely based on my experience growing up during the Marcos years, and then being imprisoned, and then having to adjust to life with Marcos as our leader. So it was a difficult time, but it was also a very rich time for a young person to begin to understand what writing was about and what had to be written. And much of that would follow after, of course, Marcos left, and little did we realize that 50 years after the first Marcos, the second one would come along. So I guess my writing is not done.
Yes. And yeah, we hope to see more, of course. And Katrina, Tuvera, you write collaborators. There we have a person called Carlos, who's an old man, who is already in a time when we have ETSA 2 and 3. In 1986, the year Patricia Evangelista was born, the Marcos dictatorship was ended because of a big popular uprising of communist, liberal, social democratic, even local business people. It was a huge alliance of different forces. And that then brought new elections, and Corazon Aquino, whom some of you might remember, was elected. Now, in your novel, Carlos, who had been who worked for Marcos, we don't know, is he dying or he's in intensive care, but so he thinks back to his youth under Japanese occupation in the war. But now there we have ETSA 2 and ETSA 3 and people, so another uprising against another President Estrada, then those who want him back, and then there's Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, we think. And I have an impression that in that time, there's something empty already in this ETSA, in this word ETSA. And was that on purpose that you chose that time when some of the glamour of ETSA had faded already?
I don't know if it was a conscious choice, but definitely I did feel that was going on. The reason I started writing about martial law, writing about martial law is because my interest in it is because I grew up in a Marcos household. My parents were Marcos supporters, and I have always said that, and I thought martial law was good when I was growing up, and it wasn't until I entered college, the University of the Philippines, that I started seeing the dark side of that. And I've always explained it in such a way, it was kind of like being schizophrenic. You know, I would be a different person at school and another person at home, and I would realize there were things I was hearing in college or at school that were not being spoken of at home. And so my impulse to write really comes from that, trying to resolve the two, which is, I'm not even so sure if it's possible, but that's the reason why I was interested in writing about martial law.
The dark side of martial law is a formulation one would not find with Patricia Evangelista, because you want to name the crimes. And can we shortly say, for the audience who doesn't know it, what were the crimes of the Marcos period?
Well, the most obvious crimes, of course, were those crimes against freedom and against the person. People were thrown in prison without warrants of arrest, and I was among those. Enemies of the state were either imprisoned or executed. A war was waged in the countryside against communist rebels. Women were routinely raped in prison. So the things we associate with dictatorships, not just, of course, in the Philippines, but in Latin America, and all of these things were happening more or less at the same time. Disappearances, you would find them in the Philippines. But I keep reminding my own countrymen that more than these visible crimes, there were many other crimes as well. Economic crimes, for example. The Marcoses were stealing us blind. Billions and billions of dollars were being siphoned from the national treasury, money that was partly came out of foreign assistance, for example, would vanish into Swiss banks, and we continued to pay for these loans decades, generations later. And again, if you look even more deeply into it, I think the largest crime was that of a nation whose mind had been captured and could not think for itself for a long time. And that, I think, was the most insidious crime of all, to stop critical thinking and to make people think that there's nothing wrong going on. And this is what my own fiction about martial law is largely about. It's about the complicity of ordinary Filipinos in the project of martial law. In much the same way that, of course, in the early years, especially under Adolf Hitler, many Germans supported his agenda and did not resist it.
Thank you very much for this summary. And we already have like one thing we will take up. Can writing contribute to critical thinking? Can writing counteract this sort of brainwash in a way that has taken on new dimensions today? If we follow Rappler, the former or present former employer of Patricia Evangelista. Your book, Patricia, is classified in Germany. We have this very dull thing about Sachbuch and literature. So it's either so it would be not. For me, this is a very literary book because, like, there's a scene very much in the beginning where you describe you leave the country and you start to question yourself, and you stand at the immigration in New York and don't remember how to fill in your name. So, and how writing this book was a way of finding a voice again, and a voice for something you didn't do. So that's how I understood. As a reporter, you were very factual. And here, it's in a way also, we learn a lot about you, how you grew up, a grandfather who was also collaborator of the Marcos time. So how would you classify this book, or how would you, or how did you write it, just simply?
How do I classify this book? This is journalism. I am delighted you think it's literary, but whether or not it is journalism. But there seems to be some sort of abiding belief that journalists are supposed to be objective. We never are. We strive to be accurate. We try to be balanced. We are expected to be truthful, but we're never neutral. We choose which stories to tell. We choose what words to use. We know the difference, for example, between an encounter and an execution, a murder and a killing, self-defense and genocide. So every writer on the ground, every journalist on the ground makes judgments every moment. And what I write is a judgment on what I see. But it's true based on the facts on the ground.
So if you read this book, you will learn how between 2016 and 2022, I go by the figure more than 20,000 people have been killed either by the police or by groups collaborating with the police. And in the beginning, the Duterte government actually bragged about these killings. It was assumed like he was voted into power with the promise of drowning 3 million people in the Bay of Manila. Or am I too? Please correct me, Patricia.
Rodrigo Duterte ran for the presidency of the Philippines in 2016. But by then, the nation knew of his legend. He was called the Punisher. He came from a city south of the Philippines named Davao, and it was reported, that hundreds had been killed by death squads he had organized himself. When he ran for the presidency, he told a story. He took every fear and every grievance fueled by decades of failed expectations in the Philippines, and then he gave the enemy a name. He called it the scourge of illegal drugs, and he said he would kill to destroy it. He said the fish would feed fat on the corpses of criminals. He said morticians would grow rich with a deluge of dead. He said that if your neighbor's child is an addict, kill him yourself. It will be a kindness to his parents. He won the presidency, and one day, I think the clearest example of his language, one day, when 32 people were killed by the police in a single 24-hour period in a single province, Rodrigo Duterte stepped up behind the podium and said, 32 died this morning, what a beautiful thing. If more died, if another 32 died, maybe the drug scourge would end. It's not 20,000, it's 30,000. Up to 30,000 people were supposed to have been killed during Rodrigo Duterte's presidency. I cannot vouch for those numbers. We are not certain. What we are certain of this, the government admits to 6,000, at least 6,200 who were killed by state forces. The police killed them because, according to the police, they were resisting arrest. Every crime scene, you will see a body and a gun on the ground. Allegedly, the gun belongs to the suspect, and the police kill them with a presumption of regularity in the performance of duty. The rest of the people were killed by, as what the police reports will say, unknown hitmen or vigilantes, or their bodies were dumped by the side of the road. Their hands are bound, their heads are wrapped in packing tape. There is a sign beside the body. The sign will say, drug addict, do not imitate. That means Rodrigo Duterte, for a time, was a success because what he wanted was this. He said, all I wanted to do was to instill fear, and we were afraid.
Jose Dalisay, in a lot of the literature on the Marcos period, we have the New People's Army as a part of the resistance to Marcos. And we have the idea that the the will of the people is to be free, and that to liberate itself from dictatorship. Now, in Patricia's book, we learn that the DDS, the Davao Death Squads, were actually made up partly of NPAs, or people who had been with the communist guerrilla and who were then recruited to be part of the... I found that when it I mean, what does that do to a person who had... I know you had not been part of that, but you were a leftist, I guess. What does it do to you to see these developments?
Well, when I was a student at university and was part of the left, we looked up to, of course, the students at the Sorbonne at that time, but also our models included the Red Guards in China, and here the Rote Armee Fraktion, among others. They were our heroes at that time. And while our intentions were pure, and we sincerely believed in the superiority of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, I went around in a Mao jacket with a little red book in my pocket and had memorized much of it. We felt that movement was true and sincere, and that it would succeed, only to be disillusioned later on when we discovered that it was just as cynical in many ways as the regime that we were trying to depose. That realization would come much later. And by that time, even if a core of communists and New People's Army soldiers remains, much of that initial movement had dissipated into common banditry and had become mercenaries to people like Rodrigo Duterte. But I must also emphasize that one of the pillars of Duterte's ascent to power was the initial support given to him by the Philippine left, because they thought that this man was anti-American imperialist, that he would follow what was called an independent foreign policy, which turned out to be a shift from the United States to China. And I'm not sure if the left predicted that he would turn into this mass executioner. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes committed by the left in my country, and why it continues, I think, to founder in many ways, trying to find its bearings.
Katrina, you take the story back to World War II, where there was an older Communist Party and an older guerrilla fighting the Japanese occupation. The Comintern said the Allies had to stick together against the Axis. So the Communist Party, who was founded against American occupation, had then work with the Americans against the Japanese. Why did, and you're frowning, but why did you decide to go back from the turn of the century to Marcos and to involve the longer memory, like to do in a way the opposite of Patricia Evangelista, who's in the present, and you go back very far back, even to the Philippine Revolution against Spain?
All right. When my first novel came out, that ended with martial law being on the horizon. It was a potential solution. What I was interested in exploring next was what were the conditions that led to the proclamation of martial law. And what were the conditions that led to people actually supporting it in the early days? Because people were very supportive of it. There was peace and order and all that. And through my research, what I came to understand was that these conditions go back oh, way back, because the Philippines at the time of the declaration of martial law, still we were independent supposedly from the U.S., but we were a neo-colony. We our trade policies were tied to U.S. interests. We were very much in partnership with the U.S. Fight against communism, and even the question of the Japanese collaboration. The question during the World War II is, if you're collaborating with the enemy, who are you committing treason against? Because we were not an independent country. We were a commonwealth of the U.S. So if we sided or helped along the Japanese occupation, then who were we betraying? Was it the Americans? If we sided with Americans and decided to wait for MacArthur, who were we betraying? I mean, treason has to do with betraying your own people. So I needed to go back
Thank
to
you
that.
very much. Patricia, do you see long historical lines that come up or that bring about this Duterte catastrophe?
Certainly. We are children of colony. And we have survived catastrophe after catastrophe. And it was part of the fighting words of Rodrigo Duterte. The Americans fucked you over. The Spanish fucked you over. So I am here to stand for you as your first true Philippine leader. Rodrigo Duterte was a phenomenal storyteller. He said, I am one of you. He said, I'm no one special. He said, I'm just an ordinary killer. Rodrigo Duterte made himself every man. So every man could be Rodrigo Duterte. He was hero. He was Messiah. He was Father, God, whatever you wanted him to be, you could attach it to him. And in this particular case, he blamed everything to our past. He was the future.
At this point, I would like to bring in a question that has been bothering me when I was translating this book by Lualhati Bautista, Dekada 70. It's a book that is during the Marcos era. It's a mother, Amanda Bartolome, of 5 sons. One joins the NPA, one joins the U.S. Navy, one becomes a writer. He's a bit like the protagonist in Killing in Jose Dalisay's novel, but one gets killed, and it comes as a surprise that it's not the one joining the NPA, but it's the one who hangs around with his friends, who drinks, and who is arrested on the suspicion of smoking marijuana. And then the parents look for him. The police says he has been released. There are papers. And then they find the naked body. And while I was writing the proposals for publishers to look for a publisher who would publish this novel in German, I thought, I thought, but this is Duterte, or this is the Tokang. This is a police, and behind it a vigilante group, and the police says, oh, we don't have anything to do. Oh, somehow he got killed. I mean, you nodded, Jose Dalisay. I mean, is there a deep continuum of vigilante killing that links the Marcos to the Duterte period? And the next, that's the question. Who would go first?
Certainly, the vigilante killings are not new to the Philippines. Killings, violence are not new to the Philippines. The difference under Rodrigo Duterte is we started applauding them. So, in the case of my investigations with vigilantes, for example, it's language from above that becomes language below. Rodrigo Duterte said, "Kill them all." A vigilante I spoke to, I said, "Look, you call yourself a good man," because he said he went to church, he had family, he believed that the future of his children was dependent on every drug dealer he killed. And I said, "How do you square that with being a good man?" And it was the same language. He said, "Ma'am, I'm not a bad guy. I'm not all bad. It's just some people need killing." And that's the autocrat's playbook. That the only way that you can conduct a war on a particular people, a particular race, a particular anyone, you have to make their lives, their deaths, less grievable. They are monsters. They are madmen. They are not human. And it's the same logic. Rodrigo Duterte said, they are monsters, madmen, addicts, butchers. They will rape their sisters, and they will fuck goats because goat is all they can find to fuck. I am not swearing. I am quoting. So the vigilantes only follow the same rhetoric from above.
Yes, please.
There is a word in English for which we Filipinos have given a different meaning. This word is salvage. And to salvage normally means, of course, when there's a ship that sinks and you want to save it and bring it up again, then you salvage that ship. But in Filipino English, under Marcos, salvage meant something different. It meant to disappear, to kill someone extrajudicially, have a death squad pick this person up, torture him, dump him into some river, and not have him found anymore. Of course, the bodies still kept turning up. And I lost many friends this way. And that word became so conspicuous, and it's in its particular context that I think Margaret Atwood once used it in one of her works. So this is the way, there's a kind of a semantic inversion here of the original meaning that has been turned around into its complete opposite. This is no longer saving. This is condemnation, which establishes that link between Marcos and Duterte, because not only were drug addicts or supposedly drug addicts salvaged or executed under Duterte, we have also had a long line of journalists who have been killed under that regime. I often bring this up, and this is my opportunity here now to say that when you think about writers in the Philippines, the writers who are most endangered, in fear of their lives, are not novelists or poets like me. They are journalists like Patricia. We are in no danger because nobody reads us. The government is illiterate. It does not understand metaphor. Okay? So we can write and scream and complain all we want. Nobody touches us. But journalists who write the plain truth, unvarnished, they are in danger and they get killed. There was a time when Filipino journalists were considered to be among the most vulnerable around the world. And that is a reality that we have to live with.
Before we open to the public, one last question. You mentioned the word salvaged. In 2018, I was working on a translation of a poem, and there was a line by Luna C. Catcleto. There was a line where the word manlalaban was in it, and it just meant she didn't want to resist a wave that was carrying her away from her lover. So a very poetic love poem. But it gave me the shivers because the word nanlaban had changed meaning already. It meant he resisted, which Patricia minded. And one of the great qualities of Patricia's book is that you go into these details of how language changed, which is a big issue here in Germany. We had Viktor Klemperer writing about the language of the Third Reich, and writers after 1945 having to reinvent the German language to be able to write again. And so it's about narrative, but it is about words itself. Where do you see, what's the work writers can do if language is really becoming a weapon in a war like this?
I'd just like to address what Dr. Dalisay said about the threats to journalists in the Philippines. Since 1986, when we got press freedom back, over 200 journalists have been killed in the Philippines. And, it's easy to say words like press freedom in places like this because we're here and we're alive. But I think it's easier to look at press freedom when you look at how it was defended with blood in Palestine. And it is difficult for any journalist to talk about safety and security without thinking of our colleagues elsewhere. Journalism is not bound by national border. And when you lose someone, when you lose a journalist, you don't just lose the person, you lose the witness. So we can all talk about press freedom or we can talk about dangers to journalists, but I think the greatest threat is death. Dead journalists don't tell stories. So I think if I leave Frankfurt with only this, I would like to say it is important when we talk about free speech and press freedom. We talk about the people who have fallen in the night and who might fall for as long as we have stories to tell.
If it is okay with the panelists, I would like to open the floor for questions. Is there somebody who could give around the mic, or I can give the microphone? Steffi, would you help? Is there anybody who would like to ask a question?
I can pass it around.
We have a volunteer who passes the microphone. So you can
The gentleman in red?
This is like a jeepney giving
Thank you for your deep perspectives on the world. What would you say, in Germany I feel like we are on the same page when we are talking about the narratives where the words are being switched, what you stated in the beginning about talking about a genocide happening, talking about violence happening, because German mainstream media has turned to talking about conflicts in our periphery, like Palestine, but also like Afghanistan and Iraq, as people not being murdered by a state or not being killed by someone. Like they remove the part of the action. They are now talking openly about they have died, they have vanished, they have disappeared. And I would like to ask, what would you tell German publishers and to German journalists about the dangers of this talk? Because I feel reminded to a very dark time to appear where the truth is so delusional and so far away from our real way of talking that we are creeping into authoritarianism as our right wing rises more and more here in Germany.
Yeah. Kimi?
You talked about narratives, right? Narratives are, well, memory for one, is contestant ground because narratives are often easily manipulated. For instance, in one of the good examples that fights against these that breaks these myths about our martial law era being the golden era is a book that's available here. I think it's from J.C. Punong Bayan, and it's called False Nostalgia. Now, as for even more remembering, I think that we've done a lot so far as a country, but we still have so many things to do. We need to document cases, and we need to focus on the victims, something that Patricia does very well in her book, by the way. And I guess something that I have always wondered about is how do we understand democracy? What kind of image do we have of democracy? Is it just electing officials every so often? We have to keep tabs, for instance, on what they're filing, what they're proposing. One of the and this is a brief. I'll end. One of the bills that were filed by a politician, and I had to look it up because the guy irritated me. One of the bills that he filed is equal rights for straight people in response to the fight for LGBTQ rights. And I'm not sure if the people who voted for him know about this, because probably after voting, they just don't care anymore. So remembering, remembering.
Yeah.
Now, this is where I will argue for the role of fiction. When we talk about language and its perversion, I think fiction plays a part in recovering and refreshing the meaning of language, because it works differently, not through reason, but through the imagination, which tends to engage readers even more. It looks like we are stepping away from the facts, and we are, but it is just a roundabout way of getting back to the truth. In an argument that is framed, shall we say, deceptively, very subtly, without hitting you between the eyes, and which you might resist, but fiction will seduce you into considering other possibilities. And this, I think, is very important when we undertake polemics, that sometimes, especially in this age of fake news, it is important to get beneath people's skin. It is important to get beyond the 5-word retort, the exchange of insults. We need to engage people's imagination, because that makes them human again. And I've often said that the best antidote to fake news is true fiction. If we write good novels, that beats bad fiction. That beats fake news.
So this is probably a question that was asked many times already, but I saw your post, Dr. Dalisay, this morning about why you didn't boycott the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I just wanted to ask, what was your decision to not boycott it? Because probably people would be interested as well too.
Well, that was never a question with me. For the information of the others here, there has been a rather visible movement among Filipino writers to boycott the Frankfurter Buchmesse. About more than 100 of us are here, but quite a few more have decided not to come because of what they perceive to be the complicity of the German government and possibly of the Buchmesse itself in the genocide that we believe is happening in Gaza. And this has been a very, very contentious issue. But at the end, and you can see us here, we decided to come because we felt that engagement was more important than what would amount to be self-silencing. Nobody gains, we feel, not even the Palestinians themselves, by our absence from here. Literature, again I say, literature waves many flags. The politicians and soldiers often wave only one flag. But aside from the flags of peace, freedom, and justice, we also wave the flags of order, of truth, of beauty, which are also important and which we are also here for. And so the politics of that issue are very important to us, but it is part of a whole body of concerns that we are here to represent and to ventilate.
I considered boycotting. It was a true consideration. The book fair has made no statement on the situation of journalists in Gaza. It did make a statement in October of 2023, standing in solidarity with Israel. So there's no argument that the book fair cannot make a political statement. They said they had to because it was in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack. I think after nearly 2 years, we are way beyond immediate aftermath. However, I'm here because of a very practical calculation. My absence will not matter. But sitting on stages like this, speaking the words, might possibly matter. And I hope to be able to extend my faith that an institution that says it is a champion of free speech and the freedom to publish will understand that no one is free. That no one is free if we are dead trying to report the story. There are more than 200 journalists who died in the Middle East in the last 2 years. It is a phenomenal, extraordinary number. Journalism, we don't really wave flags. We keep a record. There's nothing for anyone to react to. There's no story for anyone to make a judgment on if those who are supposed to report are silenced. So I know this is a political environment. I know it is controversial to say things like this in the book fair. But I have faith that this congregation of people who believe in humanity, who believe in stories and literature, will say, no, we do not support this.
I also consider boycotting, but my reasons are like one of the manifestos that I read when the boycott call was being made was that one person who was writing that manifesto said he did not even know about the Palestinian conflict until about 3 years ago, or when the Hamas attack happened. And I was thinking, and he was calling for a boycott. And I was thinking, on the other hand, I myself, I had never heard of the Frankfurt Book Fair until last year. But I have been pro-Palestine since I was an undergrad in the 1980s. And in my classes at Dalisay, before the Hamas attack, I would show students films about Palestine just to let them know what was going on. And so I felt that those kinds of things that they did, is that going to be erased if I come here? I don't think so. So I decided, I think I should go.
Can I just say one last thing? One very short thing. I don't know what the general sentiment in Germany is. I understand. I can't even explain my country. So I will not pretend to understand Germany. But when I was considering the boycott, a gentleman from the book fair told me that he was speaking amongst his colleagues, and they found it funny that people from so far away felt so strongly about what was happening in Gaza. I don't think our distance means we don't care. I think it's a shared humanity. I think, as Wiesel says, whenever anything like this happens anywhere in the world, it should be considered the center of the universe.
Thank you, Patricia, Evangelista. Thank you, Katrina, Tuvera. Thank you, Sir Butch. And sorry for taking more time, but it was very important.